Hey class, how's it going? Good morning, good evening, whenever you're watching this. So I'll be presenting. I'm doing session 9, and then the article of the piece that I will be presenting. It's called "Ecologies of Parental Engagement in Urban Education." It was a piece written by Barton and a bunch of other important authors and people that researched the topic. So we'll get right into it. So just a brief overview, kind of what we're going to capture today or talk about. The main points we're going to hit on. So the main, the heavy hitters. We're going to discuss, what EPE is. Um, Talk about parental engagement, um, space and capital, which kind of intertwines and combines both of those previous two topics. And then again, we'll end off with some questions for discussions. Something you guys can think about and maybe apply to your personal classrooms or personal lives. So with that being said, we'll get started. So just a brief summary of the article. Like I said, it was written by Barton and a bunch of other scholars and researchers. Um, Basically, the main point, so just that first bullet point here, it looked to examine parental engagement in high poverty communities and then examine a new way parental engagement can be assessed. That's pretty much just like in a snapshot what the article was about and what happened. Um, so what basically it entailed. Um, Basically, we're just going to take a look and report on two conceptual findings that emerged from the study in the article. The first one was a new way to conceptualize parental involvement that kind of frames parents as authors and agents in schools, which is a new way to think about it, their involvement or engagement. Um, and like I said, that's basically what parental engagement is. And the second part, they offer a data-driven model for characterizing parental engagement in urban schools, and that's what EP is. So it kind of takes the idea or that theory and makes it tangible, makes it concrete, something you can refer to and see how it develops. So basically, this study that the article is done, it entails a bunch of studies, but the main one of where the idea kind of came about, it happened in 2000, I believe. In 2000, January of 2000, research was being conducted in high poverty urban communities, and they were kind of investigating like parental, involvement reform. And this figure here kind of shows of what um, how they gauged that or how they measured it back then. Um, and pretty early into the study, probably like the first 2 or 3 months, there was kind of a disconnect between, I guess, the people researching and the parents. Kind of, um, they're in a no man's land, a middle ground. They didn't understand, how involvement or, um, what it really was. There was no concrete definition, and it was hard to measure. It was hard to kind of put the numbers and data there. Um, so then they kind of moved, and that's where we're going to shift into our next thing. But back then, basically involvement or engagement, you see here, it was just largely linked to being present. So we see that figure, that's directly from the article. So on the left you have the parents, and again, they're still the middleman. They're the mediating artifact. But involvement, basically, it's just parent-teacher conferences, science nights. It's just kind of doing the things, just kind of um, doing those activities or events. That's kind of um, school initiated, and then that's considered parental involvement. But now we know, it's a more dynamic entity, and that's kind of what the whole article got into, and that's what EPE kind of is. So we'll talk about that in the next slide here. So EPE, so those are just two quotes directly from the article that I thought applied. Um, so right here, in this article, we make a case for a new data-driven framework for understanding parental engagement in urban elementary schools. The ecology is a parental engagement framework. And then the next one, when we bring the analytical lenses of space and capital to bear on our research, three conjectures emerge from our data. A, that parental engagement is the mediation between space and capital by parents in relations to others in school settings. This is probably the most important, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on that as well. It's the space and capital. B, that mediation must be understood as both action and orientation to action. And then C, that the differences in parental engagement across different kinds of spaces in urban schools are both a micro and macro phenomenon. So then we'll go to the next one. So space and capital, and this kind of encompasses conjecture one. There was three conjectures if you read the article we'll talked about. But basically, space and capital, that's the, I guess, the main moving piece to make this whole thing work. So right here, it's essential when talking about the relative success parents have when engaging in schools. And this is kind of that outline, the EPE. So I'll just kind of walk you through and kind of explain it to you. So again, previously in the other slide, we kind of saw just basic. Parents just go to parent-teacher conference and its involvement, but engagement encompasses so much more. So we're really getting down to like the nitty-gritty, the why and the hows parents get involved, and the different avenues. It's not just showing up to a parent-teacher conference. It's kind of a presence, and you're involved in the learning and the facilitation in schools. So hopefully you guys can see that. One commonality, parents still are the middle part, but they make both work. So space, so when we talk about space, pretty much we're talking about, so it says school-based academic, school-based non-academic, and community-based. So it's pretty much anywhere where ideas and growth, any place that can happen. So you talk about just having an interaction or engagement at home or at church. That's kind of non-school based, and in school it could be the classroom, the lunchroom, wherever. All these places, but parents, they can be involved. And then the other moving part, the second part, is the capital. So there's a human capital, social capital, material capital, which would kind of be like the, I guess, lessons or the resources you have in the classroom. And when you have parents involved in all of those things, not just the parent-teacher conferences or meeting the teacher and having a one-on-one, but your presence as far as getting involved in the lesson planning, showing up before and after school if you can manage it with work, constant feedback and contact with the teacher, and just checking in, things like that. That's real engagement. And then you see on the bottom, and all that equates to engagement. So it says positioning within spaces through expression of space and capital. Again, you're just linking the two. And then authoring space through activation of capital. So again, other huge things. So I kind of just explained the space and capital to you to kind of get a better idea exactly what it was. Go to the next one. Okay, but I guess the drawback, there are some barriers to engagement, and we see that. So in the article, it talked about the examples of Melinda and Celia, two minority parents. Pretty much overall a positive story and positive outcome, but there were some, I guess, negatives or drawbacks that they encountered on the way. CRT, which we'll talk about, that can obviously that'll be a presence, and that's something that can affect it. And this kind of all ties into conjuncture 3. So CRT, it's critical race theory, and pretty much, so the authors or the writers of this piece, they examined a bunch of studies done with this. Pretty much CRT, it offers an analysis of the ways race and language intersects with culture and social institutions. So sometimes between the school, which largely for the most part, the school is going to follow suit as society, as the dominant culture. So in school, in America, the present, the main language is English. That's the power and the main, and especially in schools for the most part, administrative and the people that hold, the means, and all the money and power, normally, they're Caucasian or white. So they kind of set the precedent. But in CRT, we talk about that there can be a disconnect between the parents as far as maybe it could be a racial one, language, which we saw with Celia. So these are things that can happen. And in the case of Celia, there was a language disconnect between her and the school, and she kind of didn't know how to go about initiating positive engagement. She was kind of apprehensive. She didn't know how to go about it. So that's one part and one factor that you may see in your own school. That definitely can be a barrier. And in the case of Melinda, hers, it was almost like a subject. It was a subject and a knowledge barrier. As a parent, she couldn't really help or get involved in her child's math homework because she wasn't confident in what the information she knew. And we can certainly see that a lot of times parents are more involved in subjects that they know more about. So we're talking about like the literatures, and possibly math, but kind of people shy away from science. And there's examples of that in the article. But that's another barrier as well, that may not be thought of. Not all these parents had the ability or to be schooled at the best schools and to have a well-rounded social experience. So a lot of that again ties into CRT. And just not being comfortable, whether it be a language thing or knowledge or a factual thing. They just may not be comfortable. So that's another barrier to positive engagement. But as instructors and educators, the burden can kind of fall on us to kind of tear those walls down and make them feel more welcome. And that just leads me into the conclusion. Just awareness of all. As an instructor or a school, you want to make it known that parents are welcome to feel involved and to have a piece in their child's learning. They learn a lot at home and in the classroom. So the only way to make education better is if we attack it as a team, that type of thing. So just awareness on all sides that, there's things you can do outside of the parent-teacher conferences to be involved in your child's education. And this quote kind of summed it up right from the article, and right from the piece. The stories of parents in our study indicate that the mediation of space and capital, again, that's coming up again, involves the individual's ability to articulate what it is they know and want for what goes on in schools. And it requires others to listen and be responsive to that articulation. They also show us how parents engage in a very personal way in their child's education by authoring personal spaces within schools and classrooms in which they're able to activate interactive capital. So this will kind of tie into, I guess, the closing of this and some questions for discussion and some things you guys can ponder and think about. And I look forward to hearing your responses. So the first one: should the burden be placed on the teachers or administration to facilitate and invite parents to be more involved in their child's learning, or should it be a case-by-case, class-by-class basis? So that's one question. And it's free. Obviously it's up to your own interpretation, but I just kind of want to get a feel what you guys think. What are some examples of some avenues for engagement that you can utilize in your own classroom? So if you teach an environment like this, and maybe you don't, but maybe still, you want a more collaborative and a more, involved community, not just a classroom, but a community. What do you guys think? As a teacher, should suggestions and criticism from parents ever become too much? Could it lead to issues, and where do you draw the line? And then finally, what barriers to engagement are present in your classroom or district that weren't mentioned in the article, and how do you alleviate this? So how do you work to combat this, if there are barriers? And they can be ones that maybe aren't typical to this. Maybe you're in a upper or middle class environment. Maybe both parents work professional jobs and they're not around enough. So it doesn't have to be a low income case, but whatever you feel, it's kind of up for your own interpretation. So that kind of draws us to a close. I'll put that up again so you guys can just look at. Thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it, and I look forward to reading and hearing all your responses. Thank you.